we should get somewhere. So Katie Simpson. I'm going to first of all go about who Katie was, and I'm going to go to her mother's words for that, because I think obviously her mum knows better. So every time she walked into a room, she lit it up. That's how Nolene Simpson describes her daughter Katie. She was just a really good baby, so cuddly, just lovely, a lovely child, very happy, so cute and just so lovable. Now, Katie was a talented show jumper, and she was somebody who absolutely, from a very young girl, learned how to ride horses and be around them. Once she left school, she started working at a horse place where she was trying to raise money, £10,000, so she could buy her own horse, her first horse. And that's all she kind of really wanted to do. She was passionate for horses. She loved her friends, her family, going out with friends and socialising. She was a real people person. She could talk to anybody. It didn't matter their age. It says she lit up the room. I know everyone says that, but when you think of her and her smile, that's exactly what she did. She lit up every room. Now, this is Katie's story. And from what I understand, she was living with her sister Christina, who went by Nina, her sister's partner, Jonathan Creswell, and at least one other woman who was sleeping on the sofa, maybe two at times. And they had a really weird situation going on, almost like a cult-like behaviour in that house. So you had Jonathan and Christina and their children, their two children. Then the two children's aunt, which was Katie, she was 21. And then Jonathan's ex-girlfriend living in the house, and a woman called Hayley, who was sometimes there. Now, all of these women seemed to appease to Jonathan Creswell the whole time. He was in control of everyone in that house and what everyone did at all times. And he had started to have a sexual relationship at some time with Katie, the younger sister of his partner, and would spend some nights in her room the whole night, which is why I think her sister must have known. We also know at some point it became really, really dangerous. He started controlling Katie's every single movement, looking through her phone, picking what she wore, who she could speak to, removing boys out of her phone book. She wasn't allowed to have contact with anyone else. There was also domestic violence being carried out in that house against Katie. She was bruised horrifically most of the time, and it would step up to horrific rapes. Now, I just can't believe that in a small 3-bedroom terraced house, all of this was happening, and her sister says she didn't know anything. And I'm not blaming her sister, but I just think there's some responsibility at the end of the day to protect your younger siblings, and I do question that. So we're going to get into a little bit Jonathan Creswell's history, because I think that's important. And it may seem a little bit bitty, but there's so many players in this case that we have to kind of understand who they all were. Jonathan Creswell is not an attractive man, okay? He was 36 at the time when this all happened. So he was 36. He was 36 at the time he died. So he would have been in his early 30s when Katie died. So this is Jonathan Creswell, okay? And his history was very dark. So we're going to get into his relationship first of all with this lady, Abby, who was actually in the Olympics for Northern Ireland. So he was in a relationship with Abby Lyle. He was jailed for 6 months in 2010 after his domestic abuse against her. At one point, he took her into a wooded area and attacked her like she was in a horror movie. Abby Lyle, who was due to give evidence in the murder trial before it was halted suddenly, said she believed it was only a matter of time before Jonathan Creswell would have murdered her. She first met him at an equestrian event in Belfast in 2008, and they began dating and swapping text messages. She says he was very charming, very funny, and everybody wanted to be around Jonathan. And I imagine it must be something to do with his kind of magnetism as his personality, because I think he looks like Noddy without the hat. He's a very ruddy looking man. He's not particularly attractive. I don't think so. And I do think that everyone who describes him says that everybody wanted to be around Jonathan Creswell. Everyone liked him, called him Johnny. It got to the stage when he got released from prison in 2010 after 6 months of domestic abuse. He had a massive party for him and everyone was like, free Johnny, and they were so excited that he was released despite the fact that he had been released from domestic abuse. So Abby first met him back in 2008. They began swapping numbers and texts. She said he was very charming and funny, and she soon discovered actually that he had a horrific temper. He was jealous, coercive, and had a wicked, wicked temper. She said he beat her several times, black and blue. And sometimes he beat her so badly she'd be left like a Dalmatian, just spotted in bruises. She said it got to the stage where she was beaten up by him every couple of weeks. And every time she did something that was even a little bit unacceptable to him, it would lead to a beating. And she said these things could be her going for lunch with a friend, her texting someone on her phone, even her mum without asking him, or going to an event that he didn't like, doing better than him at horse riding. All of those things would lead to a really terrifying ordeal. Now, he would pick her up in his phone. Not in his phone, he never picked anyone up on a phone. He picked her up in his car, but he would arrive outside of her home and say, you need to come out now. And she would know that was to go out for a beating. And she would go out and get into the car, and he would either punch her inside of the car or take her to a wooded area near County Monaghan and left her like fighting for her life. And I can't even imagine anything more horrific than knowing that you are going to be picked up and you are going to be made to suffer for the consequences of very small life decisions. In her own words, she said, I felt so scared. I've never felt fear like that. To just be in a car with somebody and you don't know where you're going, but you know that you're going to get hurt. He would take me into the woods and threaten me every time that he would kill me. I thought he was going to do it that time. He obviously didn't, but the attack lasted for hours. He was just beating me, throwing me around, choking me, screaming at me, calling me names, asking me horrible questions. This was the worst time by far, and it would last for such a long time. And then he would just say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, let's go. And the cycle would start all over again. Another incident she described was him threatening to throw her in a bath of bleach after she was severely injured. So it would just absolutely be so painful. He filled up the bath with bleach. She could smell it from downstairs, and he's calling her Abby, Abby. And she knows that she is supposed to get into this bath of bleach. I'm sorry for anyone this triggers. At that point, somebody come and started banging on the door, and he said to her, look, if you let me answer this door and don't say anything, I'll never put you in the bleach. And so she didn't say anything. And because of that, he kindly just beat her that night instead, she says. She says there was no calming Jonathan Creswell down, and she would just have to go into survival mode because you knew how horrific it was going to come when he would do what he was going to do. And I tell you this story now because I believe that what Abby went through is very similar to what would later become the life of Katie Simpson, because we don't have her here to speak for herself. She's no longer alive. So I believe that this is the most authentic statement that we have into what the life for Katie Creswell was like. And we know that obviously when Katie, in her last kind of days, when she spent time with a man and she begged that man, please don't tell Jonathan, please don't tell anyone, please don't say this happened. I get the feeling that she knew what was going to come if she had let him know. And I believe he did find out, and that's what ended her life. Miss Lyle, who now has a successful career competing in international dressage, is hoping to be chosen to represent Ireland at Paris Olympics in July. So this was in 2024 when she did this article. She said she was heartbroken on learning of the death of Katie Simpson and sends her deepest sympathies. And she said she's glad that he's dead, even though she feels sad that he will never face trial for the crimes of Katie. So that just gives you a background, not into just Jonathan Creswell. And there was many women who said this about Jonathan Creswell, that there were times when he was just this absolutely horrific person. But people seem to be magnetically drawn to him. Whether it be male or female, everyone seemed to love him and want to be around him. Where's the other picture I had of him, which was just, I just don't really understand it personally myself. I don't get what was so great about him, but still, there are some people, that are so narcissistical that they like kind of draw people to them, because you can't, they're kind of like a mystery. You can't kind of, he does look just like Noddy, doesn't he? You can't kind of understand them, so they become an enigma, and you kind of want to understand or be the one to get his approval, because you just see how kind of hard it is. So now I want to talk about, he must put on a really good front. I think like the narcissism is the kind of true thing there. I think the narcissism is the true thing where he absolutely had this aura about him of not being untouchable, and I think it drew people to him. I really think it did draw people to him. Okay, so this takes us into August of 2020. Now, Katie was just 21 at this time. I'm going to take him off and put Katie on because I actually can't stand him. I'm going to put Katie on. I love this picture of Katie. She looks so young and she's so beautiful. And I just wonder how powerless she felt in this situation. I wonder if because everyone was older than her, he was in his 30s, her sister was there was other women in the household. I wonder if she didn't feel just so young and just like she didn't have a right to voice what was happening, just so out of her element and just overwhelmed. So Jonathan Creswell was taking her to a hospital, saying that he had found her after she had attempted to take her own life. He said to police he'd found Katie at her home, so he quickly put her in his car and called 999. En route to the hospital, they were met by ambulance, which took Katie the rest of the way. So when they take her to the hospital, her phone is missing. Creswell says, I've lost it sometime during the point where I've been doing CPR on her. I've gone home, I've found her, she's tried to hang herself, and I'm just trying to get to the hospital. It's just my partner's sister. Now, when they go to the hospital and they're looking at Katie and trying to see what's going on, her body is covered in bruises across her legs, her inner thighs especially. And her shoulder, her arms, her back are just absolutely covered in bruises. She dies in hospital 6 days later. There's nothing they could do for her. She had starvation of oxygen to the brain. Now, officers say that the death could be suspicious, but they kind of write it down as an accident, and they say that she killed herself. Now, Police Service of Northern Ireland, which is the PSNI, they just tag her death as suicide. And this causes her family to be like, no, because this isn't like Katie. Katie had everything to live for. She had dreams, she had goals, she had everything she wanted to be. Now, Creswell, because he's charismatic, well-connected in the horse world, many in the equestrian community really respect him and they just believe him. And he's really seen in the first few days of this happening as a hero. They think, oh, he's valiantly tried to save Katie's life. He's done CPR. Now, they managed to prove later on that during the time he's on the phone to 999 and he's going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like he's doing chest compressions, he's actually going through her phone at that time, turning her phone into airport mode and throwing it into a field, which means he can't be doing CPR at the same time. He's using his hands. So he's not even trying to bring her back to life. Now, a local journalist and friend of Katie, Tanya Fowles, is the person that uncovers all of this because Jonathan's being hailed as a hero. She remembers covering the case of what happened to Abby, and so she's actually looking at it thinking, this is very suspicious. Abby had him sent to prison for 6 months because of the horrific abuse he committed against her. Now we have Katie with very similar injuries, but dead, and she starts to put pressure on the PSNI. She phones the PSNI and she tells them, I think Katie has been murdered, and they say, you're a curtain twitcher. You're a curtain twitcher, you need to leave this alone, and you need to stop talking about this. Leave Jonathan Creswell alone. Now, she then says, this is really hard for her because she knows something's happened to Katie. So she starts going to Katie's family because she just can't understand how this is just being written off as suicide. She later says everyone loved Johnny. He has some sort of magnetic charm he could use to make people laugh and put them at ease. When I heard Katie was in hospital, I knew Creswell had something to do with it. I knew this is what happened. Now, one thing everyone says, everyone involved in this case, everyone who knew Katie, is I knew she hadn't killed herself. Now, this is really hard because obviously for most of us, when people kill themselves, we don't know it's going to happen. And most people, they are fighting an internal journey and you just can't see it on the outside. However, Katie is very unlikely to have bruised herself, caused herself a magnitude of injuries, and she certainly didn't rape herself. So Tanya Fowles, the story that she tells, which actually is the most concerning thing ever, is she goes to Katie's funeral and she spots Creswell at the end of the funeral stood smiling into the grave, before it's been filled in. He stood looking at the coffin, just smiling. And she's looking at him what is going on? Because he's really happy with himself. He's stood on the precipice of her grave, just looking down, smiling into the hole. So she then has to keep going back to the PSNI. She tries to work on the case by herself for days. She looks through the autopsy at the photos, and she really believes that there's justice to be gotten in this case, that this isn't right. She knows the car needs to be found. How did he get her down? the place where Katie is supposed to have hung herself from, she would have been too short to have done it. There's just loads of things that just don't add up. And yet again, we see the PSNI closing the case without doing much investigation at all. So she then tries to give this massive report that she's wrote over 3 days to the PSNI. And again, she's dismissed. They just say, look, we're not interested. This is what I want to go to. I want to explain who he is. James Brannigan, who is the experienced officer of 20 years who worked in the County Armour Major Investigation Team. That's what I wanted to go with. And Tanya. And they're working together at this point. They're trying to get some awareness. He's just actually opened a charity in her name as well, actually, Katie. So this is when, at this point, it comes out that Katie may have been seeing a new boy. It was very recent. It was very new. And she had a new kind of partner. Nobody had spoke about this before, and it's at this point things start to change. Thank you, everyone, for helping gift goal. So a member of the public phones up. They say that Katie had an unnamed boyfriend that police didn't know about, and so James takes it upon himself to go and meet this boyfriend, and he hands his phone to James and allows him to go through it. Okay, and this is where things start to become strange and unravel. So Shane McCloskey is the guy that Katie has recently started seeing. Now, on the 1st of August 2020, Katie slept at her mother's home for one night, and she had Shane McCloskey stay the night with her. Now, her mum was okay about this. Katie's 21, and Shane McCloskey is really grateful to go. He spends time with Katie, thinks she's beautiful, and Katie really likes him. Now, the next morning, she texts him saying, "I'm so glad you came," with 4 kisses. Shane replies with a love heart saying, "I am too." And then Katie messages him back and says, "Look, I need you to keep this a secret. I don't want anyone to find out, especially not Creswell." And Shane is replying saying, "Why?" Because he's thinking, "But I thought you were innocent. I thought you were single." There is a great documentary. He says, "I thought you were single." She's like, "I am, but I just don't want him to know." And this is what lets the police know that there's something very odd about why Katie would want to keep this from Creswell. Now, James explains that he goes out then, this detective, to meet with McCloskey, and McCloskey is very open and honest. Shane McCloskey hands over his phone and says, "You can read through the messages between me and Katie." And James then says the text messages are nice, they're really wholesome. They're between 2 young people, young couple. They just spent their first night together. Then the text changed. She asked Katie why she needed to lie to Jonathan Creswell. And Katie says, "Because he will kill me." McCloskey then says he's not going to kill you, but little did he know the fear Katie had was a real one. And at this point, it is quite apparent that the girl who died horrifically had told someone just the day before that she feared she was going to be killed. Now, James then manages this former detective from the PSNI, and he's a former detective, by the way, because after what happened to Katie, he felt like he could no longer work as a detective. He felt like this is not the job for him. After 20 years, he was the one that solved the murder of Charlotte Murray, who I covered the other day when I covered Lisa Dorian's case, the no-body homicide. He decides he no longer can do this, but he then persuades the higher level of PSNI to test the internal swabs taken from Katie's body from the rape kit. And they find that not only does the post-mortem analysis come back showing that Katie has Jonathan Creswell's sperm inside of her body, but it's also inside of all of her vaginal injuries, of which they are very extensive, by the way. He horrifically attacked her. Now, at this point, he realises they have him hook, line and sinker, and they can make an arrest for the rape and murder of Katie Simpson. He says, when we went into the house and arrested him in March of 2021, he wasn't expecting it. He had the crocodile tears, and when we told him, he lost it. You just knew this fucker was lying. Now, at this point, Creswell is taken in for questioning, and he immediately tries to take control. This is a narcissist and an absolute motherfucker. He instantly tries to take control of the narrative. I loved Katie. She was my life partner. She was the love of my life. We had sex several times that day on the bonnet of my car. I took her to a beauty spot. We had sex on the bonnet. She enjoyed it. Just horrific things, because we've already seen the nature of the injury on her body. This is not something she wanted to do. But as at this point, you can tie up Katie's last day was actually what Abby has already told us about what happened to her, the Olympian, because we know he would take her to a beauty spot into the woods where he would throw her around, rape her, beat her. And I believe that's exactly what happened to Katie that day. I believe he took her to a wooded area for this punishment session. I'll come and pick you up. Katie would have known exactly what it meant and what he'd found out. And she would have just hoped it was the same as every other time where she got bruised up, got taken home. And I believe at the point where he'd beat her into a point of no survival, he took her back to the home and tried to make it look like a hanging. Now, there were 2 lies that proved to be Creswell's downfall. One was how he said he'd found Katie's body, because it was easy to disprove that she could have hung herself in that way. There was no way she could have done it. So A, that's a lie. And the second was the phone data. It shows that he was putting her phone into flight mode, deleting messages, and throwing her phone into a local field. At the same time, he said he was doing chest compressions, which you can't do both. So it showed that he was never trying to revive her or bring her back to life. She had no chance of survival at that point. Then in April of 2024, Jonathan Creswell is going to appear in London Derry Crown Court to answer to the crime of rape and murder of Katie Simpson, of which he pleads, thank you, Beth, no guilty. Not guilty. Beth, you keep putting me off. I'm joking. He pleads not guilty. And he says absolutely not. Now, they tell him, the prosecutor, that we have you completely here. We have the semen. We have the injury. We have the fact she couldn't have been found the way you said you found her. And he says, no way. I'm going to see this all the way through. Now, he is an absolute narcissist bastard, and he knows that most people absolutely seem to fall under his spell, and he thinks he's going to do it here. Now, on the first day of trial, after he's heard all the evidence against him, he is told by one of the prosecutors that day, this trial is going to be about you listening to Katie's voice for once. And he decided that was not going to happen. He decided to go and kill himself that night so that Katie would never get to have her voice, because this narcissistical bastard decided that it wouldn't be about Katie, that the final story would be about him instead. And so he took away once more her story, knowing that trial would then never happen and the truth would never be completely revealed. He took his own life. He was found at home. Fuck knows why he was bailed and not remanded at that point. It should never have happened. And in a statement, they said, the PSNI, I acknowledge there were shortcomings in various stages of the investigation into Katie's death, and I unreservedly apologise for this. It took you 7 months after she died to even test the samples inside of her body. You weren't looking into who killed Katie. You were quite happy to write this off as a suicide and blame herself for her death, even though it was physically impossible for her to hang herself that way, or to rape herself, by the way. The injuries to her private areas were so significant and intense that it would have been several different rapes that happened that day. Nina, I refuse to believe her sister didn't know. I think it's physically impossible. I think if you're living in a 3-bedroom home with several other women, and he is admitting to, and other women in the house are admitting to, that he at some time spent the night in Katie's room, how would your sister not know that? We also know that Katie had bruises when she was found in different stages of healing, which means that she was being domestically battered inside of her own home. How did your big sister not notice that? How did other women not notice that? She must have known. So then I want to go over to that kinds of ends like the justice as we know it, because we'll never see that. But I want to talk about some other things and the other people involved, and the kind of cult-like mentality of the cult that Creswell was running inside of that home. Now, we know when people are abused, there does sometimes have this kind of pyramid of fear where people are maybe not saying something. But we know that inside of that home was one of Jonathan Creswell's ex-girlfriends who was staying on the sofa. A lot of the time, Hayley Robb would also be staying at that home, who was also having a sexual relationship with Creswell. Then we had Christina, the sister, who was having a sexual relationship with Creswell. Then we have Katie, who had been groomed and was being abused by Creswell, all within that one 3-bedroom home. There was a real kind of feeling that there was a cult being led by Jonathan Creswell, and everybody was fighting and tripping over each other to kind of be the one that he was in favour with him at that time. And that's what I find really, really kind of hard to understand. And I think for me, it's slightly different when it's your sister that you would sometimes, that you would have stepped outside of that and done something? Okay, so after he killed himself, they started looking into other parts of the case, which was what was going on inside of that home. We know that when he was arrested in 2020 from the court paperwork, we can see that Jonathan Creswell admits that he has been having sex with Katie for the last 4 years since she was 17 years of age inside of that home. So she was 21 when she died. He says for 4 years they were having sex, and some nights he would spend in her room. He said he spent multiple nights in her room in the days leading up to her death. So how does her sister not know that? He said she was my soulmate. You can't help who you fall in love with. I don't think this is love in any way, by the way. Oh, for God's sake. To me, that is very bizarre to call this love when you did what you did to her. So obviously there was other women inside that home, which I want to talk to you about, that were also convicted of crimes, although they never served any time. We know there was a web of deceit that went on inside of that home. So I'll put this picture up, which I've already showed myself once today. You guys weren't here for it. So this is a picture here of Hayley Robb, who was also having a sexual relationship with him at that time. We have here Katie Simpson in the middle, and then we have Rose de Montmorency, whatever her name is. She was also having sex and was an ex-girlfriend of Creswell. And then we had a woman called Jill, who was also involved. Now, the women say that inside of that house, he was the king of the house and everybody wanted to be on his good side all of the time. They say there's so much they just didn't see or they didn't want to see. I believed everyone in that home knew what was going on. And I believe the women were tried against each other at all times. I believe there was like a winner and a loser at all times. And I believe that probably as they could hear a woman being beaten up, they were like, at least it's not me tonight. Now, Jill and Hayley later admitted that they'd been asked by Creswell to take his clothes and to go and take them to wash them outside of the home to get rid of the blood. They both admitted to wiping Katie's blood from the banisters inside of the home, and they were both charged with perverting the course of justice. Jill was sentenced to 16 months, suspended by 2 years, and Hayley was sentenced to 2 years, suspended by 2 years, so they served no time. Jill insisted she never thought for a second that washing blood off Creswell's clothes was helping to cover up a murder, despite the fact that they knew that Katie was in the hospital dying after being found apparently from that banister, and Creswell had previously beaten her. They were quite happy to wipe the blood and cover for him. So at this point, they now come forward, these women, and be like, oh, we're so sorry. We wish we'd done more. We wish we'd said something. We didn't say anything, but it's too late now because Katie's already gone. And they all say they feel glad that Creswell's dead, which means that kind of Katie paid the price for everyone. And the rest of the women are just like, well, we're glad he'd gone. We shouldn't have done this, but it's too late for that. And this is kind of where we're at now. We're kind of at a stage where we will never have the complete picture. We'll never know truly when this thing started with Katie, when the abuse started. We'll never know how bad it got for Katie, if she ever reached out to anyone, if she felt like there was any lifeline. We know that she felt so fearful of him that she didn't tell her mum, that she didn't feel like there was a way out of that situation. And we know how young she was. We know that at 21, she would have felt this was all consuming. And because he was part of the equestrian world, we know that she would have felt like if she kind of pissed him off this way, it would cause so much for her in other parts of her life. Her sister, I'll show you her sister here. This is her brothers and sisters and her mum. Her sister is this one here with the ginger hair. So that's her brother, her sister, and her other sister Christine is there, and then her mum is on the end here. I think her sister looks a lot like Katie, to be fair. I just don't understand how you're an older sister and you don't step up to protect your sister. I just don't get that. And I haven't walked in her shoes, but I just don't really understand how that happened. And this is kind of where we end the case, really, because we don't have anything else. I believe that I'm not really sure why she wasn't living with her mum. I know she was living with her sister while she tried to save some money. I don't know if it was close to like the horse place she was working on, any of those things. We've never really had that information. Her sister's never spoken.